August 18, 2010, 30-year-old scuba diver Ben McDaniel was last seen by two employees entering the restricted entrance to the underwater cave at Vortex Springs in Ponce de Leon. 2 days later, when Ben's truck was discovered in the dive site's parking lot unmoved, the police were called and recovery divers gathered. Despite nearly non-stop dives by more than 16 volunteer renowned recovery divers, no trace of Ben was ever found. Ben was last seen near the locked gate that prevents uncertified divers from entering the most dangerous parts of the underwater cave. Two VS employees enjoying a recreational dive after their shifts noticed Ben trying to access the cave by tampering with the gate. Ben did not have the required scuba certifications to rent the key from the dive shop that unlocked the gate. The employees had suspected Ben of breaking into the cave prior to the 18th, but decided it would be safer to let Ben in and give him more airtime to explore, rather than risking him drowning if he got stuck trying to force his way through the gate. 2 days later, the employee that opened the gate for Ben noticed that his truck was still in the same parking spot. Fearing Ben had an accident underwater and drowned, the employee called the police. Ben McDaniel was a lifelong adventurer, an enthusiastic scuba diver, a frequent face at Vortex Springs. He was on a sabbatical of sorts during the 4 months prior to his disappearance, recovering from a very difficult period in his life. Ben grew up in a family that embraced the thrill of the unknown. Scuba diving, hiking, mountain climbing. It was in his blood. His childhood was filled with memories of exploring the world alongside his mom, Patty, dad, Shelby, and brothers Tim, Paul, and Brad. As a young man in his mid-20s, Ben was the kind of guy everyone wanted to be around. Charismatic, determined, and loved by many. He had it all: a thriving construction business, a beautiful wife, a stunning home, and a life filled with laughter and joy. But then, an untrustworthy business partner and the US housing crash brought Ben's world crashing down around him. Suddenly, he found himself owing the IRS $50,000, leaving construction jobs unfinished and drowning in legal troubles. His marriage crumbled, and he was forced to sell his $450,000 home, which had an additional $200,000 mortgage. It seemed like everything he had worked so hard for was slipping through his fingers. But the ultimate blow came when tragedy struck closer to home. On September 14, 2008, Ben arrived at his parents' house to find his youngest brother, Paul, unconscious and unresponsive. Paul was rushed to the hospital, but he had suffered a massive stroke from which he would never recover. For Ben, losing Paul was like losing a part of himself. They were more than just brothers. They were best friends, adventure buddies, and confidants. The weight of his grief, combined with the other challenges he faced, sent Ben spiraling into a deep depression. Ben's parents, Shelby and Patty, opened their hearts and their vacation beach home in Florida to their struggling son. They encouraged him to rediscover his passion for life, to find solace in the things he loved most. And for a moment, it seemed to be working. Right before he vanished, Ben spent time with his family and girlfriend in Tennessee, celebrating his mother's birthday. But that birthday celebration would be the last time Ben's loved ones ever saw him. But what happened on that fateful day, that Ben seemingly disappeared into thin air? Ben, an experienced diver, spent the late morning and early afternoon completing 2 dives at Vortex Spring. After resurfacing from his second dive, security cameras captured him returning to the dive shop to refill his tanks. Fellow divers noticed Ben sitting alongside the water, testing equipment, making notes in his dive log, and possibly waiting for the dive shop to close for the day. Vortex Spring typically closed around 5 to 6 p.m., but divers with the right kind of pass were allowed to dive later into the evening. Some suspected that Ben was waiting for everyone to leave so he could sneak past the locked gate. Around 6:30 p.m., Ben called his mother on his cell phone, which was the last contact he had with his family. He left a friend another voicemail, sounding excited for his big third dive. As the sun began to set around 7:30 p.m., Ben suited up for his final dive. He swam through the basin and main cavern, making his way to the cave's entrance and the locked gate that stood between him and the dangerous areas he was not certified to enter. Two Vortex Spring employees, Eduardo Tarrant and Chuck Cronin, were enjoying their weekly post-work dive when they came upon Ben tampering with the gate, attempting to break into the forbidden areas of the cave. As Eduardo and Chuck began to swim out of the cave, Eduardo made a decision that would haunt him. Worrying about Ben's safety, diving alone as the last diver of the day without a buddy, Eduardo turned back and unlocked the gate for Ben. He feared that Ben would overexert himself or get stuck and drown while trying to force his way through the locked gate. Eduardo knew that overexertion could cause Ben to use up his air supply too quickly, leaving him with precious few minutes to deal with any trouble he might encounter, such as tangled lines, disorientation, snagged gear, or silt clouding the water. By opening the gate, Eduardo believed he could save Ben about 5 or 6 minutes of air, minimizing the risks of overexertion. Eduardo and other divers suspected that this was not Ben's first attempt at tampering with the gate. They believed he had planned this dive to take place later in the evening to avoid detection. Eduardo felt that even if he relocked the gate, Ben would find a way through, so he chose to do what little he could to help minimize the risks. After opening the gate, Eduardo and Chuck left Ben to his dive and returned to the surface. They tended to their gear and headed out for coffee, unaware that they were the last people to see Ben alive. When Eduardo arrived the next day, he noticed Ben's truck in the parking lot. In the months leading up to Ben's disappearance, Ben had become a regular at Vortex Springs, recording over 250 dives in his dive logs. Living about an hour's drive away at his parents' beach home, Ben often arrived early to prepare for 2 or 3 lengthy dives. He would make the most of the $25 daily fee, sometimes beating the staff to the resort and leaving long after they had gone home for the day. Ben practically lived at the springs. With temperatures forecast to soar into the 90s, the resort would soon be teeming with swimmers, campers, and hikers seeking relief from the heat. The beautifully clear blue waters of Vortex Springs weren't immune to periods of murkiness or reduced visibility. The water was usually at its clearest in the early morning before guests arrived and churned up the bottom with their flippers. On busy summer days, the clarity would gradually diminish as divers entered and exited the water. A designated swimming area kept the splashing swimmers separate from the cave entrance used by divers. Occasionally, though, a swimmer would venture too close to the diver's spot, leading to minor squabbles between the two groups. Having invested so much time at the springs, Ben likely preferred to arrive before the kids started playing and clouding up the water. When Eduardo arrived to work at 10 a.m. Friday morning, he noticed Ben's big black truck again in the same spot. He started looking around, asking if anyone had seen Ben the previous day or that morning. When he realized that no one has seen Ben since he last saw him, Eduardo started to panic and called the police. While waiting for the police, Eduardo made the decision to suit up and go look for Ben. The police arrived while Eduardo was still in the cave looking for Ben. Another diver surfaced and told the police that he dove down to the gate which was left open, but did not see Ben. After law enforcement informed Ben's parents of his disappearance, they began the grueling search for Ben. As the recovery divers emerged from the depths of Vortex Spring, their expressions told a story of frustration and despair. Each team had scoured the underwater cave system, meticulously searching every nook and cranny, but their efforts yielded no trace of Ben McDaniel. The search above the surface proved equally perplexing, raising more questions than answers. Investigators, accompanied by trained dogs, combed through the grounds of Vortex Spring. Teams on horseback, on foot, and even a helicopter scoured the area near the cave entrance, Ben's truck, the buildings, the woods, and the spring runoff. Despite their exhaustive efforts, no clues to Ben's whereabouts were found. Ben's truck sat locked in the parking lot. Inside, his wallet, phone, driver's license, and a substantial amount of cash remained untouched. The vehicle showed no signs of foul play, but its presence in the same spot from Wednesday night raised eyebrows. The McDaniel family expressed their dismay at the lack of attention paid to Ben's truck for nearly 2 days. However, the staff at Vortex Spring had a reasonable explanation. Ben was a frequent visitor, often spending entire days and late nights diving at the site. His vehicle's prolonged presence in the parking lot was not an unusual occurrence. Eduardo, the employee most likely to have noticed the truck due to his friendly relationship with Ben, had not stayed late on that fateful Wednesday. The following Thursday, amidst the bustle of a hot summer day, Eduardo did not cross paths with Ben, but this was not out of the ordinary. No other divers reported the gate being open or rented the key, so nothing seemed amiss. When Vortex Spring closed for the day around 5 to 6 p.m., Ben's truck remained, but it was common for him to stay later than the other divers, likely to avoid being caught tampering with the gate. Employees left the premises without suspecting anything was wrong, unaware that 24 hours had passed since Ben was last seen. It wasn't until Friday morning at 10 a.m. that Eduardo noticed the truck and alerted authorities. The diver's lot was adjacent to property owned by the Dockery family, the original owners of Vortex Spring, who had foreclosed in 2007. As the search continued, the use of cadaver dogs and scent-tracking dogs yielded intriguing but inconclusive results. According to Ben's father, Shelby, one dog hit on the surface of the water, jumped in, and began swimming towards the cave entrance. The handler remarked that this behavior was highly unusual for the dog, leading the McDaniel family to believe it was strong evidence of Ben's presence in the cave. However, conflicting statements emerged regarding the dog's training and qualifications for water searches. Kevin Carlisle, an experienced and reputable recovery diver, asserted that the dogs brought in were not specifically trained for underwater detection. He recommended a trusted set of dogs with proper water training, but another group was chosen, possibly due to their availability. No other scent trails were found by the dogs anywhere else on the Vortex Spring grounds. Back at Ben's beach home, his girlfriend Emily Greer discovered a multitude of diving books scattered across his bed. The books covered various aspects of scuba diving, including recreational, technical, and specialized cave diving. More alarmingly, Ben's beloved rescue dog, Spooner, was found in the home, thirsty and hungry. Ben would never intentionally abandon Spooner, and his failure to arrange for someone to check on her, especially if he planned to be gone for an extended period, raised concerns. Among Ben's belongings, investigators discovered maps of the cave, notes, calculations, and extensive diving logs. While these materials painted a picture of Ben as a capable diver, disconcerting oddities began to surface. His dive log, initially neat and tidy, became increasingly messy and challenging to decipher. Ben enrolled in several classes but did not complete them, rushing through the skills at a breakneck pace without allowing himself sufficient time to practice and retain the knowledge. He moved from one difficult technique to another, without mastering the basics, as evidenced by his premature attempt at no-mount diving, despite not yet perfecting side-mounted tank diving. Ben's astonishing 250 log dives over a mere 4-month period, averaging 2 to 3 dives per day, raised eyebrows among experienced divers who questioned whether he was truly committing his newly acquired skills to memory, or merely racing through them. The maps Ben created of the cave contained errors and inconsistencies. He marked passages and openings that did not exist in reality, leading some to speculate that he was attempting to explore and dig in areas that were nothing more than solid limestone. The search for Ben McDaniel revealed a complex web of overconfidence, embellishment, and a lack of proper training and certification. The diving community, bound by a strong sense of personal responsibility and respect for the inherent risks of cave diving, grappled with the implications of Ben's actions. As the recovery efforts continued, the hope of finding answers diminished, leaving behind a haunting mystery that would forever change the lives of those who knew and loved Ben McDaniel.